Our scripture passage today comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7. The story occurs fairly early in Mark's telling of Christ's ministry and is sandwiched in between stories of Christ's healings and feeding the crowds. The passage seems somewhat out of place in these few chapters of Jesus' miracles, but my experience with Mark is that when the author does something like that, he is asking us to pay attention. So let's see what this word might have to say to us today. Listen now for the word of God. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups and pots and bronze kettles and beds. So the Pharisees and scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites. As it is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." Then he called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside of a person that can defile by going in, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, debauchery, evil, slander, pride, and folly. All these evil things come from within, and they are what defile a person." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Jim and I were driving home from the beach last weekend, and I asked him to stop at the next exit with a QT. QTs have clean bathrooms, and that is very important to me. We finally stopped and entered the much-anticipated restroom, and a mother and her young son were also going in. When leaving, an argument broke out between them as the boy did not want to wash his hands. The mother said to him in her very stern mom voice, "You have to wash your hands. That's the rule." The rule. It is interesting how these come about in our society. Many of you in this room will remember when wearing seatbelts became a law. Now, it had been proven that a seatbelt can save your life in an accident, perhaps keep you from being violently thrown through a windshield, but for some unknown reason, that didn't persuade most people. If you're as old as I am, you know there was a long national campaign for the wearing of seatbelts. For those of you in the room who are not as old as I am, I can tell you there were graphic television commercials with a dummy smashing into a wall, both wearing a seatbelt and not wearing a seatbelt, to show you what would happen to you. And there were traffic stops with the threat of a citation if you weren't wearing one. New cars started coming off the lot with a loud beeping apparatus to remind you to buckle up. But I knew people, and maybe you did too, who, took care of that device so they could drive unrestricted without annoyance. My guess is that most of us hop in the car now without even thinking. But the truth is, this life-saving device did not become common until it became a rule. Even though washing our hands keeps us from illness and wearing seatbelts can prevent serious injury, human nature's first response is to reject such protection as controlling. Reluctance to COVID vaccines is a recent example, but if you stop and think about it, there are hundreds of them. I spent some time this week in preparation for this sermon, pondering and praying what that response is about and what God's word might have to say to us about following the rules. Like many preachers these days, perhaps following some unwritten rule, I also spent some time on the internet on the subject to see what is out there about rules. One definition reads like this: rules serve to preserve order within society by providing a framework for acceptable behavior and consequences for noncompliance. Rules are essential in protecting the rights and freedoms of individuals, ensuring that all members of society are treated fairly and justly under the law. My gut reaction to that definition was quite strong, and I believe it is where the Spirit was leading me with this sermon all along. My first thought was that not all members of society are treated fairly and justly under the law. Try as we might, it doesn't seem like we can create enough laws to ensure the equal treatment of all people. Maybe we can protect people from being thrown through a windshield, but we cannot seem to offer the same life-saving protection to the most vulnerable among us needing food, housing, or health care. I suspect this is what Jesus meant when he said in his ways, or God's ways, are superior to the laws of the day. Jewish tradition had many laws, some of which seem ridiculous to us. There were laws about everything from mixing fabrics to the proper way to slaughter an animal and dispose of its blood. While we may question these laws and their relevance for our world, they were necessary at the time to create a group of people that were set apart, who were holy just as our God is holy. Following strict Jewish law was critical both to the community and to the individual. However, Christ came and claimed that he was the fulfillment of the law. While he did not abolish laws altogether, he certainly challenged ones that suppressed the vulnerable or that supported affluence to the detriment of others. He often broke societal and religious norms of his time to show love and mercy to those in need. He healed on the Sabbath, he dined with sinners, and he touched the untouchable. Christ demonstrated for us that love is not confined by legalistic boundaries, but rather is the expansive and inclusive way of our God. In speaking to the religious leaders, Jesus quotes Isaiah, a prophet they would be very familiar with as scholars of the Hebrew Scriptures. He reminds them that Isaiah claims they are teaching human precepts as doctrine. Not only are our human precepts far from the heart of God, they just do not seem to be very good at getting the job done. Christ challenges our doctrines, not just for their lack of righteousness, but also for their effectiveness, and tries to show us a better way. In his funny but deeply theological book entitled Lamb, author Chris Moore creates the story of Jesus' undocumented teenage and young adult years through the eyes of his best friend Biff. As Biff and Jesus are journeying through the Holy Land, which is a wonderful story for another day, but I do encourage you to read it, the two friends end up staying the night in what one might politely call a house of ill repute. After a long day of travel and with hungry bellies, Jesus and Biff wake up early in the morning to the smell of frying bacon. A sleepy Jesus says to his friend with delight, "Biff, Biff, do you smell that?" As a faithful Jew, Biff is shocked and quickly responds, "Jesus, we can't eat bacon." According to the story, Jesus smiles and replies to Biff, "My God, my Father, is bigger than the bacon." It is not what goes in that can defile a person, according to our passage. Our concern needs to be what comes out of us or what comes from our hearts. In ancient Hebrew, the term heart did not refer to our emotional center, but rather much more than that. The heart was believed to be the totality of a person and included all one's thoughts and actions. The heart was the entire self. So if our hearts are far from God, we are not thinking about God, and we are not acting as God would have us to act. If our hearts are not filled with the love of God, but rather with evil intentions, then our very beings are in danger of where that might lead us: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, debauchery, envy, slander, pride, folly. That is quite a scary list. Similar to our passage today, in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 22 is another story about the religious leaders of the day asking Jesus to clarify all the rules. Rules about paying taxes, about taking care of widows, and finally, about which commandments are the most important. Jesus responds to one young Pharisee, a lawyer who I suspect was particularly fond of rules, and Jesus said to him, "This is the greatest commandment. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Again, we hear the call to love with our hearts, with our entire selves. However, Isaiah claims we have abandoned these commandments given to Moses and then highlighted by our Savior in favor of a more human way. Our local outreach committee is reading a book together this year by Father Greg Boyle entitled The Whole Language. The book is filled with profound stories that illustrate the power of love and compassion in overcoming the barriers that separate us. One story that beautifully exemplifies breaking the rules for the sake of loving others is about a young man named Tito. In the book, Boyle recounts a time when Tito, a gang member who had been deeply involved in street life, had made significant progress to turn his life around. Tito was working at Homeboy Industries, a nonprofit organization founded by Boyle to help formerly gang-involved and incarcerated individuals. Despite his efforts, Tito faced numerous challenges, including a strained relationship with his family due to his past behavior. One day, Boyle learned that Tito's mother was gravely ill and that Tito desperately wanted to visit her. However, Tito was under strict probation that prevented him from leaving the city. The rules were clear. Any violation would result in severe consequences for Tito, potentially jeopardizing his newfound stability. Boyle, recognizing the profound need for Tito to be with his mother in her final days, made a decision that went against the official guidelines and chose to drive Tito himself to see his mother, fully aware that this act of compassion might put his own reputation and position in the community at risk. Boyle understood that in this moment, love and mercy outweighed the rigidity of the rules. In the same way that Boyle chose to prioritize Tito's need to be with his family over adherence to strict regulations, we are often called to put love and human dignity above rigid structures and expectations. The story from Boyle's experience reminds us that when we act out of genuine love and compassion, we mirror the heart of Jesus and fulfill a higher moral law that transcends human-made laws. Returning to the book of Isaiah, we read again that the worship God wants from us is not to honor him with our lips, but is it not to loose the bonds of injustice, to let the oppressed go free, to break every yoke, to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house. Penn introduced to us last week that we are focusing as a church on knowing the love of Christ and showing the love of Christ. Sometimes showing the love of Christ might involve doing something that is outside of social norms. I wonder what sort of human precepts, whether official or maybe unspoken, are keeping us from genuine community with one another and for caring for all of God's beloved children. What rules do we lean into that might be less than helpful to us, and we may not even realize it? At times, to show the love of Christ, we are called to push against the status quo, and I think our God is a fan of that. Our God, who threw over the tables of the money changers in the temple, our God who went to dinner with a despised tax collector named Lazarus. Friends, this is the gospel message: to love extravagantly and not let human-made boundaries keep us from the good work of the kingdom. With all our hearts, we need to strive to uplift peoples, to love as God loves, so that everyone can rest in the life abundant that God intends for all God's people. All thanks be to God.